You can remember the plot of a movie you watched 3 years ago. You can recognize someone you haven't seen in 10 years. You can remember completely useless information from a conversation you had months ago. But put a math problem in front of you, and suddenly your brain forgets how to function. Why? Why can something as simple as a number on a page make your brain feel completely overwhelmed? The strange part is, it isn't necessarily because you're bad at math. In fact, your brain might be doing exactly what it's designed to do. Let's start with something you've probably experienced. Your teacher solves a problem on the board. They explain every step. And you're sitting there thinking, oh, that's actually easy. You understand everything. Then the next day, you see a similar question on a test. And suddenly, nothing. You stare at the page. You know you've seen this before. You know the answer is somewhere in your brain. But you can't pull it out. That's because recognizing information isn't the same as retrieving it. When your teacher is solving the problem, your brain is being given the path. But when you're alone with a blank page, your brain has to build that path itself. And that's much more demanding. Now add something called working memory. Think of working memory as your brain's temporary workspace. It's where you hold information while you're actively using it. And math can absolutely fill that workspace. Imagine solving a simple equation. You're remembering the number you just calculated. You're remembering the rule you need. You're keeping track of what step you're on. You're deciding what to do next. And you're trying not to lose the information you just had. That's a lot happening at once. And then your brain adds one more thought. What if I get this wrong? Now you're not only solving the problem. You're worrying about solving the problem. That's where math anxiety becomes interesting. Because anxiety isn't just a feeling. It can consume some of the mental resources you're trying to use for the task itself. So the cycle begins. You find math difficult. You make mistakes. You start thinking you're bad at math. Then you become anxious when you see another problem. That anxiety makes the problem even harder to handle. You make another mistake. And now the mistake feels like proof that you were right all along. I'm just not a math person. And that sentence can become a trap. Because this is difficult for me is completely different from I'm incapable of learning this. But there's another reason math feels so strange. Math doesn't always give your brain something concrete to hold onto. If I show you 5 apples, you don't need a complicated theory to understand 5. But replace those apples with this. X plus 5 is equal to 12. Now your brain has to understand something it can't physically see. And mathematics keeps doing this. Numbers become variables. Variables become functions. Functions become symbols. And eventually you're manipulating ideas that don't exist as physical objects. That's why mathematical notation can sometimes feel like another language. And here's where something really interesting happens. Watch an experienced student solve a problem. They might look at a complicated expression and immediately recognize what type of problem it is. A beginner might see 20 different symbols. An experienced student might see one familiar pattern. That's because the brain can become extremely good at recognizing patterns and grouping information into meaningful chunks. What looks like incredible intelligence can sometimes be years of experience compressed into a split second. And this is also why practice can change the way a problem feels. The first time you learn something, every step takes conscious effort. But with enough experience, parts of the process become more automatic. You don't have to consciously rebuild everything from scratch. Your brain recognizes pieces of the problem before you've even finished reading it. So when an expert says, "That's easy," they might not be seeing the same problem you're seeing. You're seeing dozens of separate pieces. They're seeing a pattern. And that's also why one of the most frustrating things in math happens. You can understand the teacher's explanation perfectly and still be unable to solve the problem yourself. Because understanding a solution when it's shown to you isn't the same as being able to generate one from nothing. And that's a difference we often mistake for intelligence. We think they solved it instantly, therefore they are smarter. But sometimes they've simply built stronger connections between the pieces. So why does math feel like the hardest subject? Because it can demand several things from your brain at the same time. You need previous knowledge. You need to retrieve it. You need to hold information in working memory. You need to recognize patterns. You need to manipulate abstract symbols. And if you're anxious, you have another layer competing for your attention. That's a brutal combination. And then we make the final mistake. We turn all of those separate difficulties into one identity. I'm bad at math. But that sentence hides the real problem. Maybe you don't understand one concept from 3 chapters ago. Maybe the procedure hasn't become automatic yet. Maybe you recognize solutions but struggle to retrieve them. Maybe you're overwhelmed by the number of steps. Maybe you simply haven't encountered enough examples to recognize the pattern. Or maybe you become so afraid of getting the answer wrong that the fear itself is getting in the way. Those are completely different problems. And none of them require you to label yourself as stupid. So the next time you look at a math problem and your brain goes blank, don't immediately ask, "What's wrong with me?" Ask, "What exactly is my brain struggling to do right now?" Because the difference between "I can't do this" and "I can't do this yet" isn't just a change in words. It's a completely different way of looking at your own brain. Maybe math isn't the subject that tells you how intelligent you are. Maybe it's the subject that shows you how your brain learns.
Question your thinking.